I'm Alex Paulton. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Talking Timepieces, where we talk about watch collecting and horology. Today I wanted to talk about mechanical movements, because as you know, mechanical movements are very hot right now. In-house mechanical movements, people talking about movements, and some people wonder if that's a new thing or if that's a new phenomena. And it's not really a new phenomena. It's just more of a consolidation of what happens in any marketplace, if you think about it. Because once upon a time, say in the 50s, 60s, 70s, watchmakers were more interested in the design of the face, the design of the case, and then they would put in whatever good movement they could get their hands on. In fact, the order of importance things to look for in a watch are face, case, and movement. So some watchmakers specialized in faces, and then they would just buy cases and movements from other companies. Some companies specialized in cases. For example, the whole aspect of Tudor and Rolex is that Rolex had good cases and good engineering in their bracelets and in their crowns and pushers and packaging. The Rolex case itself was a worthwhile product, and so they put other companies' movements in it and made Tudor. But the bottom line was that the quality, the integrity of the Rolex case was an important factor in that. So in the 70s, it was more of a case of people wanted a good watch and they weren't that interested in how they got it. The fact of the matter, the fact is today it's the same issue. It's just that we're more sensitive of it because we're watch collectors. But if you think about it, in the 70s, most people didn't really care what was in their watch as long as it was a good watch. Today, nobody really cares what's in their watch as long as it's a good watch. I'm talking about the mainstream. So if you talk about someone who's out there putting $300 down on a nice watch, they're going to be more concerned if the case is nice, the face is nice, than if it's a quartz inside or a mechanical inside, for example. To them, they want that functionality, they want that look, and if they could swing it, they'll get a nice movement, but unless you really investigate, you really don't know what you're looking for anyway. I mean, there are people who talk about third-party movements in a way as if they were just being made in a sweatshop somewhere in the middle of Bangalore, when in the case of Etta, for example, not only does it have its own rich history dating back to Eterna watchmaker and to some very radical things that happened within the Swiss watchmaking industry, I mean historical things, it also absorbed several manufacturers like Unitas and Valjoux. So you can't say anything negative about an Etta, except maybe it's not from the company that made it. But then again, if it's a Swatch Group company, you could argue that it is an in-house. So theoretically, right, this Longines, it's a beautiful chrono triple date. It's a Valjoux 7750 base. It's a 7751. But the fact that Etta makes a special version for Longines with a column wheel means that this has an in-house column wheel chronograph movement, in my humble opinion. It was made by the company that owned it, and made specially for Longines in this case, so you can't even say that they're taking a generic module and slapping it in. But I didn't want to just talk at it from this point of view. I wanted to look at some watches up close. So we are going to turn the camera around and talk about movements. But I did want to mention my motivation for wanting to really talk about the movements in an episode is I got a cheap display back for my Explorer 2. I'll also flip the camera around for that. But I picked up a cheap little display back for my Explorer 2, and I'm actually really pleased with it. It brings up the fact that I think, again, Rolex is a little ultra-conservative, and they don't realize what they have because people say, well, Rolex, their movements aren't that good looking anyway. They don't need a display back. But if you look at what's out there as far as movements go, Rolex movements actually are very nice looking. And especially when you think about some of the newer companies that have gone through a lot of effort to make an in-house movement. Some of those in-house movements are just powder finished. If you think about the new Tudor in-house movement, this looks like Zsa de Coute compared to that as far as finish goes. And another aspect of it, and like I said, I'll show when I flip the camera, and I'll mention it again when I bring it up in the camera, is that putting a display back on a watch like a Rolex also eliminates a lot of those questions. Is it real? Because you flip it over, you could see that it's a free-sprung balance with a full balance bridge, just without even knowing much about watches. So unless they want to make a jumping hour GMT with a full balance bridge and a free-sprung balance wheel, to go through all of that, you might as well put your own name on it, which is another reason I like buying complicated watch that's hard to counterfeit complications. So let's flip the camera around and we'll take some of these watches out and we'll look at them up close. And I'll also talk about modular movements, like the modular movement in the Junghans Meister driver and some of the other pieces that I have. My Marie Lacroix annual calendar is at the Watch Doctor. It has a stem and crown problem. The crown wasn't seating properly, so I sent it off. That's also a modular movement. I'd love to show it to you in this episode, but I do have a complete video on it where I talk about the modular movement in it, but I do have another modular movement watch that I can show in the camera so we can talk a little bit about that aspect as well. So let's flip the camera around and talk about movements. So I've been meaning to do something about movements for a while, to talk about the importance of the movement and also the types of movement available and the like. And I've also come to realize that a lot of people are really debating some of the wrong things about movements, whether it's an in-house movement or it's a third-party movement. I think the key is it a well-made movement? Does it provide the functionality that you want? Is it a durable and reliable movement? And is it reasonably cost-effective? And what made me think about it is I had this a while, my Explorer 2, and frankly, I had the back engraved a while back, and I was debating with the idea of selling it because the residuals are so high on it. It's just burning a hole in my case, and I've got some really nice GMTs, which I'll talk about a little bit when we talk about the movements themselves. But like I recently picked up this Tag Heuer, and this is a GMT chrono with jumping hour hand, and considering that this is worth 3,000 euros more than this, it shows you something is a little bit wrong with valuation. And so I was thinking to myself, let me sell it, but I've got this engraved back. So I thought, let me throw a display back on it, and at least I could sell it at a reasonable price, because then people can see that it's a real Rolex easily. Let me zoom in a little bit. And that's the nice thing about it is, what happened is, once I put the display back on it, I fell back in love with this watch. I'm like, you know what? This is a really nice piece. Rolex's biggest problem, in my humble opinion, is not their watches. I think it's their marketing and their management, because compared to some of the more recently introduced in-house pieces, this is gorgeous. I know people say that it's not highly decorated, and that's true. I mean, compared to something like, say, for example, so we're not talking about whether or not the Rolex movement is like the best out there. We're just talking about showing the movement off, because obviously in today's marketplace, the type of movement is important to certain parts of the market. Like I said in the intro, most people do not care what's in the watch, as long as it looks nice and it works well. Only at the upper edges of the marketplace, if you think of a bell curve, the upper percentages care about brand and quality, and well, everybody cares about quality, but as far as in the deeper sense. So like, to use the car analogy, which I'm so often fond of using, most people just want a car that runs. And some people want a car that has a story and some interesting aspects of it, and maybe want to tinker with it or the like. But the bottom line is, the movement has not really gained a new importance today to the mainstream, but the movement has gained a new importance today to the collector. And one of the things I like about having a display back is, as I was saying, you can tell that it's a real Rolex because you can see that it's got the Rolex full bridge, balance bridge, and it has their special escapement, so you can actually look and see. And by the way, one of the ways you can tell is it only has one adjustment arm on the balance wheel. So instead of the two, because the wheel is adjusted by little weights around the periphery, and that's one of the ways you can tell that it's, well, if not a Rolex, then some other really high-end watch, because an escapement of that type is not on every watch. Now, when I was talking earlier, I had said about in the old-timey days, people just put whatever movements were available in their watches, and we're very happy with that. For example, both of these watches have the Value 7750 in it. Now, a lot of people say Value 7750. It's really an ETA 7750 because ETA absorbed the Value company. But people like to say Value because it sounds better than ETA. But the fact is that the 7750 not only was in every watch back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, it's still in a lot of watches today because it's a workhorse. It's a great movement. And there's no hit on a watch for having a 7750 in it, or any decent aftermarket or third party, I should say. It's not really aftermarket. Any decent third party movement. So these both are 7750s, and you can tell because they have the vertical arrangement of the sub windows, the totalers, the totalizers, as they can also be called, or the sub dials. So you can, and not only that, there's almost a little bit of a evocative case shape between the two because, well, form follows function, right? So having a third-party movement is not, the death ding of hell. In fact, I recently picked up a beautiful piece. I haven't done a review of it yet, but I'm going to. I really like this piece. This is the Boulder. This is their Meteor 360 diver. It has a meteorite face. You can see that beautiful crystal, the crystal reflections in the face. Just a beautiful piece. This is, I paid, $700 or so for this piece. And it's got a Miyota 9015 movement in it, which is the Citizens third-party movement company. And the 9015 movement is directly designed to go against the latest ETA models because the Japanese are seriously, aggressively attacking the mainstream of third-party manufactured movements. And so, for example, this Boulder micro brand has the Miyota movement in it. So it's got an aftermarket movement, but it's a good, robust mechanical movement that provides all the functionality and reliability, nicely done case, that you require, allowing Boulder to do what they do best and make a nice watch design, a nice face, and a nice case design, which is what people used to do back in the day. So I'm glad to see that a lot of these micro brands are holding up the middle of the market with these interesting pieces. So just because a watch has a third-party movement does not make it a bad watch. Now, if you want to talk about other types of movement, this is a Chinese watch. This is a Chinese-made tourbillon, and the Chinese tourbillons get a lot of crap. Let me wind this up a little bit. Get it to go. Right, there we go. And, they get a lot of crap because a lot of them are very gaudy. But if you find one like this Reef Tiger that has, a little bit more tasteful styling, you'll pick up a really good watch for the price point. You can pick up a watch like this in the $700 region, give or take. They have much cheaper tourbillons, but I think the case finishing and face isn't as nice as on some of the nicer tourbillons, which is, of course, the case with any watch. But in the case of these Reef Tigers or all of these other Chinese tourbillons, is you can get a high horology movement now in an inexpensive watch. Because, well, I mean, at one level, this is all just precision metal machining. This is a machine finished piece, and it just allows people to access this type of movement at a more accessible price. I'd like to see maybe a $5,000 tourbillon, see what somebody could do with some of these movements and maybe rework it a little bit, refinish it a little bit, put a little bit more value into it. But the fact is just because it's not, a Swiss movement doesn't mean it's not a good movement. So this Chinese tourbillon, for the price point, for the money that you pay for it, is a well worth and cost-effective piece. Now, we were saying something about modular movements up front. Oh, before I do that, let's look at one more Valjoux 7750 based movement. But in this case, this is a Longines triple date moon phase calendar. And Longines has an interesting value proposition. They try to put some very nice functionality and complications into watches at interesting, reasonable price points. And in some cases, you could see where they cut the corners. In this case, no pun intended, the case is all polished as opposed to multiple finishes and some other things that they've done so that they could offer this level of functionality at a good price point. This watch is about, $3,000 or so. But the movement is a Valjoux 7750 base, the 7751, and but what Longines does is Longines has ETA make them a version with a column wheel movement. So instead of being a cam movement like all the other 7750s in the world, the Longines 7750s have a column wheel movement because they're Longines, and it allows them to show a little bit of a difference in a world that has these third-party movements. So in this case, since Swatch owns ETA and Swatch owns Longines, and Swatch makes a specialty movement for Longines, I would make the argument that this is an in-house movement. So here's an example of a 7750 base, what would be considered a mainstream third-party movement that's been tuned up to a point where it's as good, if not better, than some of the other movements that are out there from companies claiming in-house. Now, the Tudor Heritage is another ETA base. The new Tudor Black Bay is an in-house, and actually the new in-house is all just powder finished, very a nice in-house, but not nearly as beautifully finished as the ETA-based movement that's in the Tudor Heritage, because obviously when Tudor got this movement from ETA, it decided to put Tudor mark on it. They can't just slap some, off-the-shelf ETA into it. So just like Longines had ETA make them a specialty movement with a column wheel, Tudor, they reworked the ETA movement themselves. They replaced the hairspring, they replaced the shock system, and they replaced the adjustment system with their own in-house replacements to put their mark on it. So this has actually got a very beautifully finished movement inside. Another movement, another watch where I wish they provided a display back. The newer Tudors are starting to do that, and that's because, in the entire watch world, if you're going to pay that kind of a premium for a mechanical movement, why not show it off? Which is, again, why I think Rolex should have display backs more with their watches. So now, having an in-house movement is, of course, important if you have your own technology. So like you think about something like the Seiko spring drive. You notice how smooth that second hand is going. That's because the Seiko spring drive does not have a traditional escapement. If you look in there and you look at those wheels there spinning away in there, it has a magnetic clutch mechanism, frictionless, that regulates this, and it's powered by the parasitic energy. Some people compare the spring drive to the silicon parts in an Omega, but that's only because they don't know what they're talking about. I have a video on that as well. But in this case, Seiko, well, almost everything Seiko does is in-house. And this is in-house from the crystal in the oscillator all the way up to the mechanism in the movement. Now, another watch that reminds me of this, which you can't get anymore, unfortunately, they don't make it anymore, is the Bulova Accutron, which is also a hybrid electronic mechanical movement. The tuning fork is driven by the electromagnets, but the mechanism is driven mechanically directly from the mechanical resonance from the tuning fork, 360 beats a second. That's why this watch also has a smooth beat. If you notice, they both have really nice smooth beats because they have non-traditional regulating mechanisms that split the second into more than just 8 or 10 beats. Now, when you talk about other in-house movements, some of them are quite elaborate. Like this is the Tag Heuer Carrera 2 GMT. As I was comparing it to the Rolex earlier, I mean, this is an in-house movement. It has a column wheel chronograph, movement inside of it. And yet, for all of the beautiful work on it, ceramic bezel, just gorgeous, gorgeous work, this is worth a couple €1,000 less than the Rolex. But like I said, I put the display back on the Rolex, I fell back in love with it again. Reminded me that Rolex is more than just a brand. They actually do make nice watches. I beat up on Rolex a lot in the show, but the end of the day, it's more the management and the marketing that I dislike. The watches have nothing to do with it. They're innocent. So, here's another example of a great in-house movement as well. So, oh yes, and then we were talking a little bit about modular movements. I brought that up earlier. This Tag Heuer on the mind. This Longines Meister driver, haven't worn it yet. This Longines Meister driver is a modular movement. It's a at a 2824 on the the basic module for the watch itself, with a add-on chronograph module on top. So you see, they also are showing off the movement. This has got very nice perlage. That's the round swirly stuff. And this is a German watch, but the waves, Côte de Genève, if it's from Switzerland, are on the rotor. So you can tell that this is a modular chronograph movement, because if you look very carefully, you'll notice that the pushers don't line up completely with the crown, because the crown goes to one module and the pushers go to another module. Another modular movement is this Mont Blanc Geosphere. This is a modular movement. It has a, I believe it's a Solita base movement. I did a video on this. You can check the specifics, but it's got a third-party base movement and then an in-house module for this gorgeous Geosphere world time display. It's a complete jumping hour GMT, just like the Explorer 2, and it's also worth several $1,000s less than the Rolex Explorer 2, which shows you that the valuations in the market are skewed because this gorgeous piece, I mean, this is not a cheap piece. This cheap piece is still worth about $5,000, but that's worth $8,000 without papers. And this watch is frankly a far better GMT watch than that. This one's not as rugged as that, but this one is. Okay, so here we have two GMT watches that together cost almost as much as that Explorer 2. But then again, that's the nice thing about a collection. It allows you to mix and match. But as I said, when I put the display back on the Explorer 2, it made me realize that it's a nice piece and I should keep it in the collection. But as you see, there are many ways to show a dual-time GMT function, and some are more attractive than others. Actually, this one is not as functional as I'd like it to be because the globes are very, very well loomed. So at night, they obscure the hands when they're at the 12 and at the 6. I would have gone with less loomed globes or different colored loomed hands. So at night, it's easier to see. But this watch is just so beautiful, you can't really ding too many other things about it. As I said, there's a video on this in the archive. So that's my little talk about movements. It's not important whether it's an in-house movement or a third-party movement. What's important is if the movement is well made, if it's functional, if it's reliable, and it does what you want it to do. So let's turn the camera around and close out the episode. So that was modular movements, mechanical movements, talking about movements up close. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any questions at all about any aspect of it, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thanks, and please subscribe. It always helps. And I'm almost at 500. Which isn't bad for a 2-year-old channel, so please subscribe and tell your friends. Thanks. Have a great one.